Police were able to identify a potential suspect in the murder and sexual assault of 16-year-old Sherry Jo Elliott.
She was walking to the school bus and never made it.
Face down in a watery ditch, shot in the back of the head. This is a very violent execution.
And I said, no, Sherry, it's not safe. I said, I don't want a police come knocking on my door and tell her that you're murdered or raped.
I used to think that if you met a murderer, you would know. That something in the face, something in the eyes, would give it away. It doesn't. Some of them spend decades looking exactly like everyone else. They go to work. They laugh with their neighbors. They shake your hand. And for 43 years, nobody had any idea what they were carrying. On the morning of November 2nd, 1983, 16-year-old Sherry Jo Smith stood in front of her bedroom mirror before school. She wasn't thinking about danger. She was making sure her clothes matched. That was simply who she was. If her shirt didn't match her shoes, she would change. A few minutes later, she kissed her mother goodbye, walked out the front door, and started toward the school bus stop. She never came home. From that morning on, Joyce Smith stopped measuring time by birthdays or holidays. She measured it by an empty bedroom, a frozen bowl of yogurt no one would ever eat, a television that stayed silent, and the sound of a front door that never opened the way she kept imagining it would. For 43 years, detectives searched for the man responsible. When science finally found him, there was no arrest to make, no courtroom, no confession. Only the truth. And a family forced to learn it, decades after the life they loved had already been stolen. This is that story. Welcome to True Crime Hour. This case remained unsolved for 43 years. Before we go any further, tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We read every single one. If you're new here, subscribe. It helps us continue telling stories like this. Parents don't remember the important mornings. They remember the ordinary ones. Because those are the mornings they never imagine they'll have to replay for the rest of their lives. Long before November 1983, long before police reports and missing person flyers, Joyce Smith knew her daughter in a much simpler way. When Sherry Jo was 2 years old, Joyce bought her a thick coloring book. Most toddlers colored a page or two before losing interest. Sherry Jo didn't. She sat at the kitchen table, gripping each crayon with both hands, turning one page after another, until every picture had been colored. She didn't quit halfway through. She finished the whole book. Looking back, Joyce would say it was the first glimpse of who her daughter really was. If Sherry Jo started something, she finished it. A few years later, while visiting family in Florida, 7-year-old Sherry Jo fell from her grandmother's 3-wheel bicycle and scraped her nose badly against the pavement. It swelled. It bruised. A few days later, her uncle was getting married. He wanted her to be his flower girl. Most children would have begged not to go. Sherry Jo never asked. She put on her purple dress, stood beside her uncle with her injured nose still healing, smiled for the photographs, and quietly did exactly what she had promised to do. That was Sherry, not loud, not dramatic, just quietly dependable. As she grew older, another part of her personality became just as obvious. She trusted people, but not blindly. One afternoon, a couple stopped nearby and asked for directions. One of Sherry Jo's friends walked toward the car without a second thought. Sherry Jo stayed exactly where she was. She answered from a distance. She never stepped closer. Years later, Joyce would replay that moment over and over, because somehow, her daughter had always seemed to know that some lines weren't meant to be crossed. She was careful. She noticed things. She wasn't the kind of teenager who chased danger, which makes what happened on the morning of November 2nd, 1983, almost impossible to understand. You can tell a lot about a family by what happens after school. In Joyce Smith's house, every afternoon unfolded almost exactly the same way. Before Sherry Jo got home, Joyce would mix yogurt with Cool Whip and place it in the freezer. She knew exactly when it would be ready. The front door would open. Sherry Jo would kick off her shoes beside the space heater. She would walk straight to the couch. Before she touched the yogurt, before she turned on the television, she always did her nails. Then she would switch on The Young and the Restless, pick up the frozen yogurt, and settle into the same corner of the couch where she sat every afternoon. It happened so often that nobody thought about it anymore. It was simply home. Joyce never imagined she was watching a routine she would one day remember more clearly than almost anything else. Years later, she could still picture the shoes by the door, the bowl waiting in the freezer, the television turning on at the same time every afternoon. She kept remembering the routine because it was the routine that never came back. November 2nd, 1983, was cold enough to bite. Joyce told Sherry Joe to bundle up. The bus stop was only 2 blocks away, but the wind that morning cut straight through anything thin. Sherry Joe wanted to leave a little earlier. Joyce shook her head. "It's not safe," she told her. "I don't want a police officer coming to my door and telling me that you're murdered or raped." It was the kind of warning parents say every day, not because they believe it will happen, because they believe saying it might stop it from happening. Joyce never imagined those words would become the last warning she would ever give her daughter. Sherry Joe nodded. "Okay." She hugged her mother. "Love you." Then she walked out the front door, exactly as she always did. Her clothes matched. Her hair was just the way she wanted it. Nothing looked unusual. Nothing felt different. The hardest thing about last mornings is that they never look like last mornings. Around noon, Joyce's husband, Bob, came to find her at work. She knew something was wrong before he spoke. Sherry didn't come home. For a second, Joyce waited for him to smile, to tell her it was all a misunderstanding. He didn't. By evening, the routine that had repeated itself every school day had quietly fallen apart. The frozen yogurt was still sitting in the freezer. The television had never been turned on. The shoes beside the space heater hadn't moved. Joyce called Sherry Joe's father. "Have you heard from her?" "No." Then they called the police. The response was one families have heard for generations. "She's 16. She probably ran away." Joyce didn't argue because she was emotional. She argued because she knew her daughter. "Nothing is missing," she said. "Her clothes are here. Her money is here." She didn't leave. The answer never changed. Give it time. Wait until morning. Joyce would spend the rest of her life wishing she had never heard those words. Morning came. Sherry Joe still wasn't home. Joyce packed a bag and drove to Flint. Home had become the one place she could no longer bear to sit still. Every morning began with the same thought. Today's the day she comes home. Every night ended the same way. She didn't. Joyce and Sherry Joe's father printed hundreds of missing person flyers and carried them everywhere. Restaurants, gas stations, grocery stores, telephone poles, anywhere someone might stop long enough to look at her daughter's face. Every time Joyce walked into a restaurant, the same thought came into her mind. Is Sherry eating? She stopped noticing whether she was eating herself. Friends later remembered how much weight she had lost. Joyce never remembered deciding not to eat. She simply couldn't think about food while wondering if her daughter had any. Every girl wearing a blue coat made her look twice. Every payphone made her hope it would ring. Every unfamiliar face became a possibility. Crime Stoppers announced a reward. Local television stations interrupted their broadcasts with Sherry Joe's photograph. Tips poured in. A yellow Camaro, a white van. Someone who thought they had seen her at a shopping center. Someone else who was certain they had seen her walking down another street. Detectives followed every lead, because ignoring even one of them meant risking the only chance they had to bring her home. Then, 18 days after Sherry Joe walked out the front door, someone found what everyone had been praying would never be found. 18 days after Sherry Joe disappeared, a trapper was checking his lines along Mueller Road in rural Saginaw County. Near a drainage ditch, he noticed something that didn't belong, a flash of color against the brown November grass. He walked closer, then he stopped. He turned around, found the nearest telephone, and called the police. When deputies climbed down into the ditch, they found 16-year-old Sherry Joe Smith lying face down in the cold water. She was still wearing the clothes she had left home in that Wednesday morning. Her pants were unbuckled. There was a gunshot wound to the back of her head. Joyce was at work when Detective Doug arrived. He wasn't carrying a folder. He wasn't carrying photographs. He was carrying something small in the palm of his hand. Years later, Joyce would still remember how slowly he opened his fingers. Inside his hand was a necklace, Sherry Joe's necklace, the same one Joyce had watched her fasten before leaving for school. The detective looked at her quietly. "Is this Sherry's?" Joyce stared at it for a long moment. Then she nodded. "Yes, that's hers." The detective lowered his head. Then he said the words, "No parent survives hearing." "She's dead." Everything Joyce remembered about her daughter suddenly belonged to the past. The coloring book, the purple flower girl dress, the frozen yogurt waiting in the freezer, the television that came on every afternoon, the girl who always finished what she started. In a single sentence, she became a memory. The autopsy answered some questions. It created even harder ones. Sherry Joe had been shot 4 times, once in the abdomen, twice in the back, once in the head, but one finding stopped everyone. She hadn't died immediately. The medical examiner concluded she had survived for another 3 to 4 hours after being left in the ditch. 3 or 4 hours, in cold November water, alone, waiting for help that never came. Years later, Joyce would say the hardest part was learning that her daughter had still been alive. Not the gunshots, not the ditch, the waiting. That was the detail she could never escape. Detective Sergeant William Art did everything investigators in 1983 knew how to do. He photographed the scene, collected the clothing, clipped the fingernails, collected biological evidence, logged every piece into the evidence room. He didn't fail. Science simply hadn't caught up yet. DNA testing capable of identifying a killer from those samples didn't exist. So the evidence disappeared onto a shelf inside an evidence locker, waiting, not for weeks, not for months, for 43 years. While the evidence waited, Joyce tried to learn how to live inside a house that no longer made sense. Every afternoon, The Young and the Restless still came on at exactly the same time. The couch stayed empty. The frozen yogurt in the freezer was never eaten. She couldn't bring herself to throw it away. The purple flower girl dress still hung in the closet. The matching clothes stayed folded in their drawers. The shoes still rested beside the space heater. Every room in the house looked exactly the same, except the person who gave those rooms their life never walked back through the front door. In the first days of the investigation, detectives looked where detectives almost always look first, inside the family. Sherry Joe's stepfather, Robert Schultz, became their focus. He had been one of the last people to see her alive. Investigators questioned him repeatedly. They asked him to take a polygraph. He refused. The suspicion didn't end there. More than once, detectives called him, convinced that if they kept pushing, eventually he would confess. He never did, because there was nothing to confess. Joyce never wavered. He wouldn't hurt her, she told them. He wouldn't hurt any child. But once suspicion enters a family, it rarely leaves quietly. For months, Joyce watched the man she loved live beneath an accusation he hadn't earned, while they were both trying to survive the loss of the same daughter. And while investigators kept returning to Robert, the real killer woke up every morning, went to work, stopped at grocery stores, smiled at strangers, and lived as though nothing had ever happened. Months became years, then years became decades. By 1985, investigators had interviewed more than 200 people and followed thousands of leads. Yellow Camaros, white vans, anonymous phone calls, reported sightings. Every promising lead eventually reached the same dead end. Detective William Art kept working, until there was nothing left to work. The case didn't end. It simply stopped moving. Joyce stopped visiting the police department. "If you don't have anything new to ask me," she finally told Detective Art, "please don't ask. Every time I come here, I have to lose her all over again." He understood. There were no new answers to give her. Life outside the investigation kept moving. Life inside Joyce's house didn't. Some afternoons, she still made the frozen yogurt. Not because she expected Sherry Joe to walk through the door anymore, but because habits are harder to bury than people. She would sit alone on the couch. The young and the restless would begin. The television filled the room with familiar voices. The one voice she wanted most never came back. Her son Jim would sometimes find her standing outside Sherry Joe's bedroom. She wasn't cleaning it. She wasn't rearranging anything. She was only looking, as though part of her still expected to hear footsteps in the hallway. People often say time heals. Joyce never believed that. Time didn't make the grief smaller. It simply taught her how to carry it, without letting everyone else see the weight. In 2002, 19 years after Sherry Joe was found on Mueller Road, Detective Art tried one more time. The DNA collected back in 1983 was entered into CODIS, the FBI's national DNA database. Then everyone waited. No match. Not because the DNA was wrong, because the man they were looking for wasn't in the system. The investigation stalled again. And while the evidence sat quietly inside an evidence locker, the killer built a life. He married year. He found steady work as a dental hygienist inside a Michigan prison. On weekends, he played guitar in a local band. Neighbors waved when they saw him. Co-workers knew him as dependable. No one looked at him and saw a murderer. Maybe that's the hardest part of this story. Not that he escaped justice for a while, but that while Joyce measured her life by everything she had lost, he spent those same years living as though nothing had ever happened. Nearly 40 years had passed. Most detectives would have accepted that the case was never going to move again. William Art didn't. In 2022, something unexpected happened. A Border Patrol agent arrested a man at an airport in Utah. He had been living under a false identity for 16 years. The name reached Detective Art. Something about it felt familiar. He opened the old case files. There it was. The same man had been interviewed during the original investigation into Sherry Joe's murder before leaving Michigan decades earlier. For the first time in years, there was a reason to hope. Art obtained a warrant. The DNA sample was collected. Then everyone waited. The result came back. Not a match. Another name crossed off. Another door closed. But something had changed. For years, every new lead had only reminded Art how impossible the case had become. This time, the failure reminded him something else. The evidence still had answers. They just didn't have the technology to hear them yet. Late in 2024, Michigan State Police made one final decision. Instead of looking for another suspect, they sent the evidence itself somewhere new. To Othram, a laboratory in Houston that specializes in solving cases everyone else has given up on. Among the evidence was something investigators had collected back in 1983, a sanitary napkin Sherry Joe had been wearing the day she was attacked. Inside it, DNA had been waiting for 42 years. Not lost, not destroyed, just waiting for science to catch up. The sample was fragile. Time had damaged it, but it hadn't erased it. Inside the laboratory, scientists began doing something detectives in 1983 couldn't even imagine. They reconstructed a genetic profile. Then they started building a family tree, one branch at a time. The first real lead wasn't a suspect. It was a woman living quietly in Wichita, Kansas. She had never heard of Sherry Joe. She had never been to Michigan. She had no idea why detectives were standing at her front door. They explained everything. She listened. Then she agreed to help. She gave a DNA sample. Her son did too. Neither of them knew they were helping solve a murder committed more than 4 decades earlier. For months, genealogists, detectives, researchers, even students from Western Michigan University worked through birth records, marriage certificates, family trees, one branch after another. Every wrong branch disappeared, until eventually, only one name remained: Ronnie Collins. Ronnie Collins had lived in the area in 1983. He was in his early 30s, and buried inside the original case file. Detectives found something almost forgotten. A witness had once mentioned a white van. For 40 years, it had been nothing more than another tip. Now they learned something else. Ronnie Collins had owned one. Suddenly, the old witness statement didn't feel forgotten anymore. It felt like a missing piece. In January 2026, Detective Art picked up the phone. He asked Ronnie Collins if they could meet. Collins asked for more time. The holidays, then after New Year's. Art agreed. The meeting was scheduled. The day arrived. Art waited. Collins never came. He called. No answer. He called again. Still nothing. Something felt wrong. Art obtained a warrant for Collins' DNA. Then he and his partner drove to the house. Collins's wife answered the door. Before either detective could speak, she quietly told them Ronnie Collins was dead. On the day he was supposed to meet detectives, he had taken his own life. The DNA came back. It wasn't close. It wasn't probable. It wasn't one possibility among many. It was Ronnie Collins. The DNA recovered from Sherry Joe's clothing matched him completely. 43 years. Reduced to one laboratory report. The man detectives had been searching for since 1983 finally had a name. But there was no one left to arrest. No interrogation. No courtroom. No confession. Collins had already decided that part of the story would never happen. And with him, every answer disappeared too. Why Sherry Joe? Did he see her walking to school? Did he know her routine? Had he done this before? No one would ever know. Investigators began looking again at older disappearances. 2 girls, Halloween, another white van, another family that never got answers. Collins quickly became the prime suspect. But suspicion is not proof, and dead men cannot be questioned. Some questions survive longer than the people who could answer them. When detectives began speaking to people who knew Ronnie Collins, they kept hearing the same words: quiet, friendly, reliable. He worked inside a prison, played music on weekends, neighbors waved when he drove past, people trusted him. Nobody imagined the man tuning his guitar on Saturday night had spent 43 years hiding the murder of a 16-year-old girl. Maybe that's the hardest part, not that evil exists. That sometimes it looks completely ordinary. Detective Art knew this would be the hardest call of his career. He called Joyce. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then he asked her something no detective really expects anyone to answer. Knowing this, "How does it make you feel?" Joyce didn't answer immediately. Finally, she said, "It doesn't change anything. I still can't hug her. I still can't tell her I love her. So nothing's changed. 43 years of waiting." And that was the truth waiting at the end. Then Detective Art told her something else, something the family had never known. Sherry Joe hadn't died immediately. She survived. For hours, alone, in cold water, waiting for help that never came. Joyce had already spent 4 decades believing she knew the worst part of her daughter's death. Now she discovered there had been another layer beneath it all along. "A terrible way to die," she whispered, just laying there, all alone. Some grief never gets smaller. Sometimes it simply finds another place to hurt. A few days later, Joyce searched Ronnie Collins's name online. She found his obituary. People called him kind, generous, a wonderful father, a gifted musician. She stared at the words. Then she began typing. "He murdered my daughter." She posted it, again and again. Every website removed it. People defended him, said she must be mistaken. The truth had finally arrived. But even then, people still believed the killer more easily than the mother. And perhaps that is the final cruelty of this story. Ronnie Collins got to keep his reputation. Sherry Joe never got to keep her life. Bob died in January 2025, just days before detectives finally identified the man who had murdered Sherry Joe. For more than 40 years, he had searched beside Joyce. He never lived long enough to hear the answer. Sometimes, when the house is quiet, Joyce still catches herself speaking to him anyway. Not because she expects an answer, because after carrying the same question together for so long, it still feels wrong to keep the answer to herself. "We got him, Bob. We finally got him. There are houses that keep time differently. This is one of them." The years moved forward. The calendars changed. People grew older. But one morning, Inside that house never really ended. A 16-year-old girl walked out the front door wearing clothes she had carefully matched, her hair exactly the way she wanted it, promising she'd be home later. She never walked back and the frozen yogurt stopped being made. The television stopped meaning anything. The place beside the space heater where she always left her shoes became just another empty space on the floor. Some absences become part of a house. You stop seeing them until someone asks. Then suddenly, they're everywhere. Joyce still talks to Bob sometimes. She tells him the things he waited a lifetime to hear. We got him. Then the house goes quiet again, not because there is nothing left to say, because the only person who was supposed to hear those words never came home. Thank you for watching True Crime Hour. We'll see you in the next one.